So Ubisoft just released 5 minutes of AC Mirage promo titled A Return to the Roots, and this really got my interest as a fan of the older Assassin's Creed who has been waiting to see the promise of a classic AC aligned game satisfied. So here's just my rambly thoughts on this promo. It begins with a segment on parkour, and while I liked a lot of this and generally felt well marketed to, this segment left me with some apprehensions.
For parkour, we look to our previous games for inspiration and chose to put the emphasis on comfort and fluidity. In Mirage, parkour is easy to learn and to master. Our approach is closer to the Ezio games, where it's all about keeping the flow and the momentum going, with the design centered around verticality.
This is the part of the promo that really worries me the most. That was as good as a jump scare to me. The reason that's worrying to me is because while invoking the movement of the Ezio trilogy, comfort and ease are mentioned. In the context of Assassin's Creed movement, comfort devastated the control, skill curve, and the player expression that you can generally find in the Ezio trilogy. Now, I can't speak for everybody, I'm not going to do that, but when I think of the characteristics of Ezio trilogy parkour that make it generally enjoyable, the opposite adjectives come to mind, barring fluid. Fluid is about right. Relative to future Assassin's Creed games, I like that there isn't an emphasis on comfort, that I will be punished, that it's possible to be very bad at parkour, and conversely to be very good at parkour. Operating within that broad skill curve is so much more engaging than the narrow corridor of expression that new movement exists in. It's not like you can't be better or worse at Origins through Valhalla parkour, but because control is relinquished in the name of comfort, of making frustration and failure improbable things, you're very securely anchored to an inefficient, unattractive average. You can be above average and you can be below it, but without meaningful player control, you'll never be that far off. You don't really have the agency to flourish or flounder in a newer Assassin's Creed game. In the Ezio trilogy, the distinction between terrible, bad, average, good, great, prodigy, it's evident, because without the confines of comfort, a player can strive to be faster, more creative, more cinematic. It's no coincidence that the series has gradually shed missions and mission types that are centered around interesting movement. It feels more like this is meant to allay people who didn't like Ezio trilogy parkour than those who really did and were good at it. An Ezio-inspired parkour system designed with comfort and ease in mind, that sounds like pretty words for people that think the system is clunky because they're playing it like Origins. Because they're flying off buildings of their own accord and then making slanderous impact font memes about it. If Mirage's parkour is easy to learn, then that is a strength, honestly. A weak point of those older games that I do like so much is their tutorialization. You're not going to get a lot out of ejects and move cancellations on a first playthrough, but easy to master brings a heartbreaking close to that sentence. But Bushnell's lore is easy to learn, difficult to master, so he could have just misspoke, and Eivor might become an assassin in the DLC. Dude, Bayek is going to bring the apple to the Temple of Solomon in the Hidden Ones. It's pretty much confirmed. But yeah, I won't get my hopes up in regard to parkour. That's the thing that I'm the most skeptical of. I am hopeful that future showcases will quell some concerns. Like in 2 days, we're meant to be getting another mini showcase about Baghdad itself, which does look pretty well designed. We get a few brief looks at it here. We're told it's narrow and denser, and yeah, it looks that way. On the off chance that back ejects are given height again, tight spaces like this would be a joy to traverse. And there's a real variety in elevation levels too, like this looks fantastic. This is a space that could be tackled in a great number of ways if we were given mechanical freedom. And this segment also gives us a pretty decent look at the HUD, which is pretty much the same as the last few games. The quest being played here is called A Job Well Done. So Basim is presumably returning after having done something for the assassins. Maybe his first assassination actually, seeing as this is promotional footage and it was likely recorded in the earliest stages of the game. There's also a big number 16 where the skill points used to be displayed, so it looks like some kind of skill tree will be included, and that I'm wary of. Tomorrow's showcase is about Basim himself, and I'd imagine there'll be at least some mention of his skill set, so we'll talk about that more then. There's a golden book in the navigation bar, and I imagine that like Valhalla that'll yield an ability or a skill point, which is not very roots of this rooty game. But I quite like what Valhalla did with the books of knowledge, where instead of feeling like an item on a checklist, they felt, I would say, more like a beacon that guides you toward a much more interesting location. I think that would actually quite benefit Baghdad's character, a sense that there's dark secrets beneath this very pretty city, whose surface alone doesn't really convey the tone of an AC1 type game that's quite gritty and bleak. The stealth segment actually had a lot to like, or a lot that I liked. I don't really know how this is being received. This is just a very quick, like off-script thing. We first see Basim assassinating with some hide spots here. Rooftop gardens are back, and I really like the assassination animation. Basim stabbing this guy in the back, and then following that movement with a pull back into the hiding spot. There's a real sense of momentum here that's aided by the camera being quite dynamic and moving in step with the assassination. It strangely reminded me of some of AC3's finishes in that respect, and that's high praise from me. I really like those. Then there's a bench assassinate, and this is really interesting. So Basim begins on this bench with a white outline, he's presumably blended here, and he leaves that when he stabs the guard. So things might not be as lax as they were with bench assassinations of the past, and that makes sense. Basim is stabbing this guy from a few feet away. He's not as close as you had to be in older games. So maybe that frustrating gap between you and a slightly too far away guard is closed at the cost of convenience, because this does look slower than old bench assassinations too. Something comforting was Sarah Boyo, the narrative director, making mention of combat being a final resort for Basim. He's trained and prefers to be sneaky, and that's paired with footage of Basim pickpocketing a guard. And it's great that that's back, that there should be some option to replenish consumables non-lethally on the fly, because in the same clip, a hanging brazier is glowing, and I'd imagine that you could release that using a consumable like a throwing knife. And what's quite encouraging is the mention that lots of work was put into improving enemy detection. One of Valhalla's most frustrating qualities was enemy detection. It was broken and it had no real consistency. It was pretty much impossible to wrangle. Mirage, on top of pledging to improve that, it looks to reintroduce detection states properly. One of the more annoying trappings of Valhalla's system was its very binary nature. You were either seen or unseen, fine or, you know, city-wide manhunt. You would just get locked into combat. In this prototype, you can see Basim get spotted, and then the guard enters an investigation state. The guard doesn't unsheath his weapon, but he speeds up and starts approaching the area at a decently fast pace. I really like what we've seen of stealth because, generally speaking, it looks to punish and hopefully reward the player accordingly. Like the next clip shows Basim's eagle being shot because they got too close to a marksman. Surveillance is now a thing that you actually have to think about. There's also guards who will prod bushes like we've seen in the past, and horn bearers, kind of conscious alarm bells. If they see you, they'll alert other guards. This emphasis on archetypes, different guards who pose different threats, hopefully will make stealth more of a dynamic affair, with a number of different risks to be approached in a number of different ways. Crowd blending is back too, seemingly in a passive function, unlike Valhalla where you had to kind of opt into a blend. Basim looks to blend with proximity, and it looks like Eagle Vision can be used to locate blendable crowds. Guards in red, civilians unmarked, and then crowds in blue. I hope allies are given a different shade of blue, but that's a neat feature that I can see coming in handy with assassinations. Taking a vantage point, finding a crowd, and getting by unseen. And regular civilians being distinguished from their blendable counterparts, it makes it seem like this game would have a few linear, cycling crowds, but we can see here that civilians will freely move with a blend spot forming when there's enough civilians in proximity, and that looked great. There's two guys stood still on Basim's right side and one stood on Basim's far left, and they're connected by this guy who passes through, briefly blending Basim. The way that moving and stationary citizens seem to dynamically form blend zones, that looks fantastic. Having blends that depend on connective moving citizens like this guy, it makes the act of blending much riskier than solid reliable crowds. I really liked what we saw of stealth today, but there is one thing that doesn't look so good here. That's Basim's walking speed. He's kind of stopping and starting to stay within a crowd's boundaries. In the earlier days of high and low profile, you could pretty much guarantee that you'd match a civilian's walking speed with just the default walk. And beyond that, you had the options of a fast walk and a gentle push. The dev showcasing Basim's blend seems to be kind of fighting with a walking speed akin to fast walk. Now that'd be really frustrating to deal with, so I hope that that's amended, because everything else to do with stealth does look really promising, much better than I thought it would. It's mentioned here that there's a network of bureaus and that they provide a series of missions. The two that are mentioned are rescue missions and assassinations. Not much more is mentioned than that, but I hope that these are much more than the standard AC Origins Bandit Camp objectives. Those sucked. What we have in the Bureau is a hub that connects our central characters with an organic outlet for missions. So I'd hope that these are really solid Brotherhood-esque side missions that give back to the story, that work with the game's themes, and not just fort objective galleries. It's the name rescue missions that has me quite concerned there. But the next part of the showcase got me shamelessly, childishly hyped.
We want you to feel truly immersed in the life of a hidden one, investigating your target's identities, tracking their movements, and sharing information with your allies. Then, when the time is right, you can strike from the shadows. We've crafted a new investigation board which replaces our most recent quest log in Mirage.
And with our black box missions, we give you the freedom to approach key assassination missions however you see fit.
From top to bottom, assassinations sound intimate and detailed. Investigations are classic Assassin's Creed. They're an exercise of an assassin's moveset that build the character of this target and their setting. Without ever having spoken to a target, a good, solid series of investigations can give you a real sense of familiarity with them and their values. And if done right, that information and that assassination as a whole is pertinent to the narrative and protagonist. And then using that information in a black box format, knowing where guards are posted, their blind spots, areas of entry, all that stuff that AC1's investigation spotlighted, and these investigations presumably will, it sounds great. Finally, there was also the announcement of a darker AC1 inspired filter. Now I appreciate that there is an option for older fans that won't be widely appealing, but the filter itself I'm quite unsure of. AC1, or I say AC1, this looks very Aka-y. It wasn't just cold. Color grading was intentional and befitting of this oppressive, war-beaten city and the bleak events that took place there. Then Jerusalem and the epic, ancient capital of Damascus, they weren't so bleak. Their music was bigger and a bit warmer, and so was the colour. There was artistic intention there. Now, I don't know much about Baghdad's history or the events of the actual game, but as of today, I'm unsure of whether this filter is reflective of the story or world. It just looks dry and dissonant with the actual setting. But that's everything, I think. Let me know what you guys think of this. Like always, I will be down in the comments. I'll be covering the next few days worth of promo, and then after that, I've got a big AC3 critique thingy that is quite close to being done. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, maybe leave a like, and if you didn't, maybe let me know why. Thanks again, and I will see you guys tomorrow.